Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. To many people on the social media, particularly in the diaspora, will be familiar with this gentleman here. The debate on whether people should criticize the opposition or not has been heating up. Unfortunately, this is a debate that has been going on for so long, but it's typical of Zimbabwean political discourse. It's not based on any facts and truth, and no respect of reality on the ground. This is what is so pathetic about some of these debates. Let's just listen to what this gentleman has to say.
Zimbabweans, the level you lose, man, irimkati medu vamwe vedu, honestly, is that of high quality. High quality lose, man. Listen, we are not denying kuti opposition munogona ngemuchito wama mistakes because mune vanhu vakangoita seninewe. Okay? But look at it. Kuna vamwe vanhu, especially vari muno mudiaspora, who are only there to criticize the opposition. Iye kumuti tikaisarekera online, this petition online, kuti guys, ngatiti vana vama-ministers vari muno, vari kupinda zvikoro muno, vadzingwe muno, haasaini kana haadi nesignature yake. Muna vana Opa Mchinguri, muna vana Priscilla Chigumba, nanani kuva mwana uya uyikwa ziyambi, vari muno, vari kuenjoya ma-benefits omuno, vachiseenzesa kurekera mari dzenyika, dzakadiwa nana baba wacho. Ngatichisaina petition, that person hadi. Unongo achiti Chamisa akaipa. All right, Chamisa akaipa, okay, fine, akaipa. Then, what solution do you have? Dololo, hana kana solution.
The argument could go on. I think we should just focus on what he's saying there. To start with, these people are very quick to acknowledge that the opposition make mistakes and how quickly they move away from it. This is at the heart of the problem of their weakness. Let's start with the statement itself. They make mistakes. Now, are we saying here that the opposition has been on the political stage for 23 years, 5 of which was in the GNU, and they failed to implement even one democratic reform? That's number one. Number two, after failing to implement the democratic reforms, with the GNU debacle, they decided they were going to continue participating in flawed elections, knowing fully well that participating would only give Zanu PF legitimacy. And thus perpetuating the dictatorship. And to crown it all, these guys have been participating in these flawed elections, insisting that they will win them. In 2018, Chamisa came up with a statement that his MDC alliance has got stringent measures to stop Zanu PF rigging the elections. And for these elections, 2023, he was at it again. We have plugged all the vote rigging holes. God is in it. Are these mistakes? Or is this a clear-cut case of treasonous betrayal of the people? We cannot keep on arguing round and round the issue, pretending that what is there is something else. These are not mistakes, for Christ's sake. These are deliberate, calculated betrayal. Mugabe bribed them with the trappings of high office, and they forgot about the reforms. They themselves have acknowledged that it is absolutely meaningless to keep on participating in these flawed elections. But they also knew that Zanu PF was offering a few gravitron seats. And therefore, then they've been participating. And for somebody to keep on repeating, oh, these are mistakes, we all make mistakes. These are not mistakes, for Christ's sake. So let's call a spade a spade. Let's stop pretending that these are mistakes. These are not mistakes. It is unbelievable. You know, we can't keep on arguing round and round an issue without being specific. This is what we are talking about here. Number two, even if we accept that these are mistakes, the question then is, these guys have been in power for now 23 years, 5 of which in the GNU. 10 years post-GNU. And they're still making the same mistakes. They're still participating in flawed elections when they know the process is flawed. Is that really a mistake? If it is a mistake, have they learned from that mistake? If they keep repeating it, surely one has got to say, these guys have not learned from the mistake. So to somehow say, oh, these are mistakes and we should move on. Well, if they are mistakes, if they learned from them, they clearly haven't learned from the mistakes. And to keep on moving on, it's just burying our heads in the sand, isn't it? We have got a problem here. Some people just don't want to discuss these issues as they are. This is not a mistake. They've not learned from the mistake. That is a fact. And the third point, we should not forget that CCC, MDC, have been appointed, elected into office by the people of Zimbabwe specifically to implement the democratic reforms. By the late 1990s, the people of Zimbabwe came to the realization that Zanu PF was corrupt, incompetent, and tyrannical. They also came to the realization that as long as Zanu PF is able to rig the elections, they will stay in power. We'll never get them out. And the other realization was that as long as Zanu PF is in power, they will never reform themselves out of power. So we need somebody else to implement those democratic reforms to make sure elections are free, fair, and credible. That is at the heart of it. So the specific purpose of MDC CCC was to implement the democratic reforms. And after 23 years on the political stage, including 5 in the GNU, surely it makes sense that people should be asking, why have these guys failed to implement reforms? And for somebody to say, no, we should not criticize Triple C, it's totally nonsensical. We can't keep on arguing over the same issue. We want somebody who will implement the reforms to get out of this mess. And that is the reality. That is the fact, the reality on the ground. Democracy, the point number D, democracy is the government of the people, by the people, for the people. The very essence of democracy is that those in public office must be held to account by the people. Are we saying here that the opposition, by virtue of being the opposition, they cannot be held to democratic account? Because every time you try to say Triple C have failed to do this, you're criticizing them. It's not, Triple C are not the problem. Zanu PF is the problem. So in other ways, we only hold to account those, the ruling party. We do not hold to account the opposition. Is that what we are saying here? That is nonsense. Absolutely utter nonsense, particularly when you're talking of a specific task that was set for the opposition. I repeat, the opposition, the MDC, Triple C, were elected for the primary purpose of implementing the reforms, because Zanu PF was never going to reform itself out of office. In other words, Zanu PF has managed to retain power these last 23 years, not because Zanu PF is smart, but because the opposition, whom we gave the task of implementing the reforms to stop Zanu PF rigging the elections, have proven corrupt, incompetent, and they failed to carry out that task. Point number E. This issue of those people who are criticizing Triple C are failing to come up with alternative. This is utter nonsense. Total rubbish. During the GNU, credit where credit is due, SADC leaders reminded MDC leaders, particularly South Africa's Minister Lindiwe Sulu, reminded MDC leaders repeatedly for the need for them to implement the democratic reforms. In fact, she made herself so unpopular that Mugabe was even scolding her in public, calling her a street woman, because she had been putting so much pressure on MDC leaders to implement the reforms. Did they listen? Of course not. And I can tell you that it was not only SADC leaders. Many other people commented on why is MDC failing to implement reforms. So to turn around and say, oh, we are not offering any alternative, it's total nonsense. On this current crisis that Triple C is facing right now, with all these people being recalled, how many times since the launch of Triple C have many people said you should have a democratic constitution with structures and have democratically elected officials in the party. And Triple C leader Nelson Chamisa and many of the Triple C supporters all dismissed it. No, 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 we don't want it. No, 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 it will be a way of infiltration and so forth. You cannot be offered the alternative and then you reject it. And when you get into trouble, you say, oh, you never offered an alternative solutions. In any case, let's be very clear here. The people, it's not imperative that they must have an alternative to hold those in public office to account. That has got nothing to do with it. Those who are holding public office should account for what they did or failed to do. Period. To say we must have a look at your alternative and evaluate it before you can ask that question is totally nonsensical. It's totally irrelevant. Why is it that you're insisting that people should have an alternative? What has that got to do with it? Democracy is not conditional, that only those who have got an alternative, a viable alternative, can hold those in power to account. No. And we must get out of this foolishness of repeating the same thing, of pretending that because you have no alternative, you should not have the right to ask those in public office to account for what they did. No, they must be held to account. They must be accountable to the people, regardless of whether the people are supporters of that particular party or not, whether they are in Zimbabwe or not. We have got to get out of this cycle that Zanu PF landed us in, where most people could not hold Zanu PF to account because people like George Charamba, Chris Msangwa would argue that you cannot do that because you did not fight in the Liberation War. The democratic right to hold somebody to account does not depend on your contribution during the war or lack of it, or whether you're in the trenches or you're not, whether you're in the diaspora or you're not. That has got nothing to do with it. Focus on the issues. That is what you should be addressing. So to keep on repeating the same thing and pretending that no, those people cannot be held to account, they are doing their best, is total nonsensical. Doing their best in what? Is failing to implement reforms somebody doing his best? No, it's not. That is the issue. That is what we must focus on. And it is totally unacceptable that people should be silenced because you dare not say anything, otherwise you'll be accused of supporting Zanu PF. How can I be supporting Zanu PF if I'm saying we need to implement reforms so that we can have free, fair, and credible elections? Since when has Zanu PF been fighting for free, fair, and credible elections? It is important, point number F there, it is important that we accept that all those who hold public office are accountable to the people. If Nelson Chamisa and some of his supporters believe that he should not be held to account, then he should not be in the kitchen. If you can't stand the heat, get out of the kitchen. He should have never been in the kitchen in the first place. My last point is that after 23 years of MDC/CCC, on the political stage. People should have a clear idea of what MDC, Nelson Chamisa, and his friends was expected of them. What was expected of them? Simple. They were elected by the people specifically to implement the democratic reforms to stop Zanu PF rigging the elections. They have failed to implement even one meaningful democratic reform in 23 years, including 5 of which in the GNU. They have been participating in flawed elections, knowing fully well that their process is flawed, knowing fully well that by participating they're giving legitimacy to Zanu PF, and thus perpetuating the dictatorship. To focus on Zanu PF is to lose the point completely. Because Zanu PF has managed to stay in power, particularly since the 2013, at the end of the GNU, not because Zanu PF guys are smart or they become more ruthless, but because those people whom we have entrusted to implement the reforms to stop Zanu PF rigging the elections have themselves been corrupted by Zanu PF to forget about the reforms and participate in the flawed election for the share of the spoils of power. This is the number one issue we have got to address as a nation. There are some people who want to bully and think the opposition are doing a great job and they should not be touched. You have got to define what that great job is. And to just say, oh, yes, they're human beings, they can also make mistakes. Yes, what are those mistakes? Let's be specific. To call failure to implement reforms mistakes is ridiculous, because those are not mistakes. That is a result of being corrupt and incompetent. And to pretend that they've learned from those mistakes is again another idiotic argument, because clearly they have not. Why are they keeping on participating in flawed elections if they've learned the mistake? We need to deal with the problem. And the very idea that we cannot criticize the opposition for failing to do what we set them to do is at the heart of why we are in this mess. We can bury our heads in the sand and pretend we've got solutions. We don't. The solution is getting a competent opposition that will implement the reforms. That is the solution for Zimbabwe. It has taken 23 years to come to that conclusion. A long time, 23 years. Alas, there are some who still have got their heads buried in the sand, who still refuse to see that the problem here is the opposition that has failed to implement the reforms. And typical of some of these individuals, they now want to bully and bamboozle everybody into submission that the opposition are infallible. They should not be held to account. No, the opposition are not infallible. The opposition are not demigods. the opposition have shown beyond all reasonable doubt that they are corrupt and breathtakingly incompetent. And to call somebody like that infallible beggars belief. Everybody who holds public office must be accountable to the people. That is not negotiable. That includes the opposition. And to keep on arguing that the opposition should not be held to account because they are not the ones in power is to miss the point. They are the ones who are helping Zanu PF to stay in power. That's why they must be held to account. You are not going to end Zanu PF stay in power if you don't implement the reforms. That is a fact. And you are not going to get Nelson Chamisa and company to implement any reforms. Because if they fail to do so, when they had the golden opportunity to do so during the GNU of 2008 to 2013, it is naive to think they can do so now when Zanu PF holds all the trump cards. That is the reality. That is what we've got to deal with. Do not look to SADC, because SADC did try to help us during the last GNU, and we wasted that opportunity. And the failure actually to acknowledge that we were our own worst enemy during the GNU is at the heart of why SADC, I believe SADC even now are hesitating to be in any way involved with the Zimbabwe situation. For the simple reason that with the corrupt and incompetent opposition, they know that even if they were to force Zanu PF to go into another GNU, can you seriously expect this lot to implement even a handful of meaningful democratic reforms? Got to be naive. They're already busy fighting among themselves right now. Yes, Zanu PF is taking advantage of that, but it's to be expected. You cannot deny the root cause of the recalls is the failure by CCC to have a democratic party with a democratic constitution with properly and openly democratically elected officials. The strategy of ambiguity has backfired on CCC. That is the reality that you must face. I would like to thank you very much for listening. And I hope with this debate, we cannot keep on pretending and discussing it on an abstract notion that, yes, these are also human beings, they make mistakes. What are the mistakes? Let's be specific. What are you talking about? You know, we need to be really specific here. We have got the details, historic facts. So there's no need to be vague on what you're talking about. And to still be thinking that CCC would deliver the democratic change that we want after 23 years of doing nothing is the most pathetic argument I've ever heard. Thank you very much for listening, and good night.